An ugly carrot-looking thing is pulled out of the snowy ground. A young child smiles as she says this must be her lucky day. It is noted that her father was an ice sorcerer and her mother is a werewolf. Her family barely makes ends meet by foraging the snow-covered grounds for herbs. As she carries her basket, she notes this will be good for her mom's pregnancy. To this young girl, poverty was not the biggest issue as we hear some people laughing behind her. She turns to see a group of boys laughing together before one of them notices her. The boy points, telling his homies that it's her again. The boys then mock her ears and wonder why she is picking plants again before calling her a vegetarian. She notes that these guys are pure-blood werewolves and like many others love to pick on her. They yell, telling her to scram as something is hurled at her head. She notes these people hold nothing but contempt for her as blood starts to drip. One of them tells her that she should respond when a werewolf is talking to her, as he then calls her a mongrel. She rubs her face as she notes people's disdain for her sting more than the harsh winds of the north. She wonders if it's really that wrong to be half-blooded as footsteps approach her. A foot stomps the ground as the boy asks her why she is not responding, as she internally says oh no. She starts picking the plants as she notes these were for her mother. The boy reaches out and asks if her legs have given out due to fear. The young girl covers herself and shouts as something flashes from her hand. A slice occurs on the boy's face as he wonders what was that. The girl, now carrying an icicle, wonders if this is ice magic. The boy cracks his finger, saying she never learns, and says how dare she attack him. She points at him, telling him to not come near her and that if he does she'll use the icicle. The brat scoffs with a smile as his friends talk about what she just did. They then yell, telling her ice magic is not special here in the north, so what is she gonna do? They also think she must be stupid due to being half-blood. He shoves her and says she needs to be taught a lesson as her back slams into a tree. The impact causes a jolt in her body like Avatar Ong as she sees an image she's never seen before. She sees the image of a female human and wonders if that is her. She would later realize that it truly is her as we see the lady carrying a book. This causes her to recall memories of the story she once read, which was about the head of the dragon hybrids and the female protagonist known as the Red Cloak. In the story, this character would meet a half-blood wolf during a battle against wolves. The wolf begs for mercy and begs to at least go recover the body of his dead sister. Red Cloak fancied the man begging her and let out a smirk before grabbing his chin and deciding to make him hers. As they kissed, our protagonist reads the novel, saying this is exactly the kind of story she wanted. She notes how much she loves the author, the Crimson Cloak, and the boy who opens her heart. Our pre-reincarnated protagonist imagines the boy being very beautiful as she rolls in bed, calling the author the best. Her face twitches as she wishes she could go see him for herself. A flash occurs as the story now turns back to the young girl's eyes. She is now huffing and puffing as she notes she cannot believe this. Her hands tremble as she notes she has now been reborn into the novel. She then internally says wait as she thinks about the Crimson Cloak. The boy, still there, asks if her brain is working properly now and starts to say something as she then gives him a hard bump and runs off. She continues to dash as he asks if she is out of her mind. Our protagonist says the author must be insane for this, as she notes she did say it'd be nice to meet the character though. The boys chase after her during all this as the story then pans to a house. A white-haired lady wonders if Eve will be back soon as she tells her baby that his sister needs to be back so they can all have hot dinner. The lady calls the baby her son as our protagonist notes the male protagonist was her unborn little brother. Within the Crimson Cloak story, humans and hybrids coexisted. However, there was a deep grudge between the werewolves and the dragon master. It all spawned from the legend that the wolves stole a dragon chief's heart. The chief's heart was only supposed to be given to her companion. This caused the chief to lose control of her powers due to anger and rage, and she was soon ready for death. In the present day, the legend seems to continue on with the Crimson Cloak's brother also having just one heart. He, like the dragon chief from the legends, also lost control of his powers and faced death. This infuriated the Crimson Cloak, who blamed the wolves and went on to pull a Firelord Sazin and wiped out the north. In the novel, our protagonist has actually been reborn as the dead older sister who got killed by the Crimson Cloak. The cold wind blows over the land as our protagonist Eve wonders how the author could do this to her. She notes that she has had to endure a life of being looked down upon and now will end up as a pile of ash in the future. She cuts some wood as she notes she must get out of here. She notes that no matter what happens, she must avoid getting killed. She seems to be cutting at her own house as her mother comes out asking what that sound is. Eve tells her mom wolves attacked the house and told them to leave or else they will kill us. Her mom covers her mouth as Eve notes she must keep her brother and the Crimson Cloak from meeting. Her mother hugs her, saying Eve must have been frightened. She notes that to keep them from meeting they must first leave this place, and she will have to lie to her mom. Her mom tells Eve that if they go deeper in the woods it'll be safe and that she will protect Eve. All this while Eve hides the hatchet behind her back, and Eve notes she is not only protecting herself but everyone else as well. As if mocking her situation, her brother was soon after born, as she is later seen carrying him in silence. Her mom's health continued to deteriorate after his birth, as no full blood would help them with the delivery of a half-blood. As she holds her mom's hands, her mother calls her name. She tells Eve that good things come to good children and to never hate but be kind and giving. Eve yells mother as her mom calls her daughter. Her mom slowly fades away as she tells Eve to forgive her. The baby starts to cry in Eve's arms as she herself is shaking. She says that she understands this is a fictional world, but also that this is still terribly saddening. With both parents gone, she is left to protect both herself and her brother. Several years would pass after they had moved deeper into the woods, as we can now see the wind blow past a grown-up Eve. She stares down at the ground at a young child. She wonders what this girl is doing here in the woods. Narrator interjection, but they cannot make it any more obvious who this is with that freaking red or crimson cloak. It's Little Red Riding Hood, of course. Eve notes the young girl's burning hot with a fever. She turns as she notes someone else will probably come by and help the girl before her mother's words call to her. She remembers the line that good things come to children that do good deeds. She clenches her teeth as steps are then taken. Eve wonders if she pitied the child or if her mother's words were why this happened. She would go on to bring the young child home in a trance, unknowing what the consequences this decision would bring. Her brother dashes toward her, yelling her name. She asks if he had fun all by himself and asks if anyone strange came. He says of course not, as she then pats him on the head and says good. Eve asks if the girl has awakened yet, to which Zion says no. Zion tells his sister that the girl must be very sleepy to be sleeping this long. The door creaks open as they note it has been 3 days. Eve tells Zion that the girl must still have a fever and asks if he can bring her towels and cold water. Narrator interjection, but her brother's name reminds me of that one basketball player with baby mama issues. Eve notes the young girl is not showing much improvement despite all the good herbs she gave her. She also notes that she cannot take this girl to a doctor due to their financial situation. She stares silently before slumping over and thinking it was a mistake to bring the young child here. She then reasons that it would be too dangerous to let the girl wait for someone else to come outside. She apologizes to the girl, saying there is not much she can do before she holds the girl's hands. An icy spell seems to occur as she starts to feel a twitch in the girl's hands. Eve is shocked and asks if the girl is awake now. The girl makes some noises before Eve stares and notes the girl's eyes are like rubies. She then says wait and realizes these are crimson eyes. She walks back as she notes in this world there is only one creature with red eyes. Her brother innocently calls her name as he has come back with the items. Eve reaches the door and says oh no as the young girl rises. She notes that if her memory serves her right, this child is the one who will kill her and take her brother away. This is the female protagonist, the Crimson Cloak. In the novel, the Crimson Cloak asks the man a question. She asks Zion what she is to him. He is silent, but she tells him to hurry and answer. While shedding tears of sorrow and crying, he said that she is his savior. This statement is mirrored in the current story as the young child calls Eve the same thing. Eve stands uncomfortable and wonders why she is hearing this line right now. She pulls her hand away from the child as she tells the kid calling her a savior is a bit much. Eve then wonders why the Crimson Cloak is even in the north already. According to the natural storyline, the protagonists were supposed to meet as adults. Eve wonders if the storyline has changed as her brother pulls at her dress and calls her name. Eve, clearly agitated, tells Zion not now and tells him to stay over there. Sion asks Eve why she won't let him see the girl and asks if Eve will allow him to see her later. She internally imagines to herself how if the two meet now things will turn out like they did in the novel. Eve tells Zion that she does not want them to scare the girl as she tells her brother to go out the room. He tearfully agrees to this. As he glumly leaves the room, the child calls Eve Miss Savior. She tells Eve that this is overdue but thanks Eve very much for saving her. Eve tells her not at all and that she did what anyone else would have. Eve says she was worried but is now glad the child looks well. Eve notes to herself it may be due to the Crimson Cloak being a child, but she does not look dangerous at all right now. Eve notes that as long as she sends the kid back and keeps her from meeting Zion, the plan should still work. Eve notes that she does have a plan to survive in this crazy novel, and it involves buying a noble title even if it sounds impossible. Eve was hoping to take her brother to the human realm, but brokers only help pure-blood wolves that are well known enter that world. She notes that her and her brother won't get the chance since they are poor commoners who do not even have a surname. However, as with any world, anything is possible with a lot of money, so her grand plan involves purchasing a noble title and taking her brother to the human realm with her. She notes that she has memorized the herbal medicine book her father gave her from front to back and has started selling valuable herbs to make money. She notes that she does not know how jumbled up the storyline is right now, but if she can return the Crimson Cloak home safely, and if everything goes according to plan, her and her brother should make it to the human realm and have a happy ending. Eve is imagining all this in her mind as the young girl stares at her in confusion. The child calls for Miss Savior as Eve says yes. The child apologizes before asking where she is and who she is. Eve is now stunned and says she is not sure what the child means. She grabs at the bedsheet as she hopes that line does not mean some crazy situation is happening right now. She internally pleads with the author and hopes that the one situation is not happening right now. The child murmurs silently before saying to Eve she does not remember anything. Eve falls to the floor saying, "Oh my God." She calls the author crazy as she notes this cliché has been done way too many times. She asks if the child really does not remember anything as the kid says all she remembers was that it was hot. Eve holds her head as she recalls the kid looked like she was in some kind of accident before fainting. She wonders if this is an after effect of that and notes it is not like she can just tell the kid her name is Rachel and she is an OP dragon hybrid that controls fire, or mention that her brother is the Southern Chief before sending Rachel home. This is all info from the novel, by the way. Eve wonders if she needs to take Rachel home. Eve shakes her head, noting that even stepping foot on the land of dragon hybrids is asking to be killed. She continues to think as Rachel sits in silence. She calls for Miss Savior again and says that since she has no memories, she cannot repay her savior back for her kindness right now. Eve shakes her hand, telling Rachel it is not necessary before Rachel jumps forward saying she really wants to repay her back for her kindness. She then asks if it is not too much trouble, then could she stay here until her memories come back. Eve is stunned and notes she can already hear it. The sound of her plans going off the rail as she continues to tumble over. Also the sound of her life sinking into the pits of despair. Later in some woods we see that someone is dashing through. As they sprint they eventually run into a group of other individuals as they stop to breathe. They ask if the person has found the girl yet, to which they say no. A man then asks what they have been doing all day then before pulling his hood off and telling his men to find her before he gets rid of all of them. They yell yes sir as they all dash in different directions. The man grits his teeth as he says, "Where are you, Rachel?" In some town square Rachel starts to say something to her savior as Eve tells her to refer to her by name. Rachel then asks Miss Eve where they are going as Eve says they are going to check up on Rachel's health and get clothes. Rachel then asks for the reason why they have to cover their faces as Eve nervously says it's to not catch a cold. As they stand to the side someone calls for them saying V. Eve asks why he was so late and says that she has nice goods today. It is noted that Eve has been selling herbs discreetly in the square for a while now with only a few customers. Narrator interjection, but selling quote-unquote herbs discreetly in an alley sounds very interesting. The guy notes this is a rare one as he asks how much it is. She tells her it is 10 gold as he yells that's too much before she tells him to not be startled. She tells him it is a high quality fire plant and that she can give a discount if he buys in bulk. He lets out a groan as she notes she sells while covering her face to distort her voice so that people won't know if she is a man or woman. Eve then mentions that there is a way to lower the price. The man asks how as Eve tells him to give Rachel a checkup. The man stares for a moment before saying he's never seen her face as Eve says it is her little sister. The man notes Eve has never brought her before as Eve just tells him to give her a checkup as he is a physician. The man then kneels down asking for Rachel's name as Eve tells Rachel it's okay as this guy is not a bad person. At least she thinks so, which annoys the guy. Rachel is hesitant before stepping over as the man then puts his hand on her forehead. Time passes as the man then questions how the girl does not know why she fainted and has no memory. Eve, now covering up Rachel, asks the doctor if she is in bad shape. The doctor says he is not sure but thinks the girl suffered great shock and that in most cases memories come back in a few days, but Eve questions what he means at the end, to which the doctor asks how the girl hurt herself this much to end up like this in the first place as she is still young. He also notes on top of that the girl has a temperature that is high for a northerner. Eve stutters saying the girl had a high fever a few days ago and that it might not have gone away. The man then tells Eve that there is a rumor about how a child from the south has gone missing. He glances saying it is the little sister of the Southern Chief. Eve wonders if she has been caught as the man then asks if Eve knows the North and the South's relationship. She then decides to go for it and yells, telling him of course she knows, and mentions that she is a wolf as well if he knows. And she angrily says that the rumor has nothing to do with her anyways. The man tells her he is not sure what she has up her sleeve but warns her to be careful. He steps away as Eve notes she must send the girl back however she can. She notes that at this rate she won't even be able to leave this place alive, let alone survive the original plot, as the dragons are probably out to get her. The girl then calls for Miss Eve, as Eve then recovers and says they should go back now, and asks if Rachel wants to eat anything. Rachel says anything Eve makes is fine, as Eve notes the female protagonist is trying to make her feel better and how adorable she is. Eve then says to herself to think positively, as she is okay for now since Rachel won't kill her or anything. Something then catches Rachel's eyes as she points, asking what is that. Eve says it is a dream catcher and that it is meant to catch and keep nightmares away when you sleep. Rachel says nightmares as she looks down. Eve recalls when Rachel's eyes would look down in the novel. This was after losing her family and she would constantly have trouble sleeping. Rachel was horrified by the horrible dreams that came every time she closed her eyes. It was noted that the only time she could save herself from the pain was after she had met Zion. Eve notes there's still a lot of time before the original novel begins, as she asks if Rachel would like one. Rachel nervously tries to say no, as Eve tells Rachel to give her a second. She then walks over to the shop before coming back to give one to Rachel. Eve kneels down, telling Rachel that she will always have sweet dreams now. Rachel touches it and says thank you to Eve before Eve tells her they should get back now. Rachel holds it close to her heart as she says okay. This is how Eve came to become the guardian of the Crimson Cloak. The female protagonist meant to kill her as they both walked home. The door creaks open as Eve yells that she is back, to which both Zion and Rachel, who are playing together, excitedly shout her name. They rush over to hug her and ask if she sold a lot today, to which she says yes, and that she was even able to get groceries. Eve tells the pair they are so cute and asks if they were playing with each other's hair. Sion says yes, and that he can even do Eve's hair for her. Eve asks really before saying she cannot wait. She then leans over to Zion and asks if he was able to keep Rachel from seeing his ears. Zion nods happily as Eve notes to herself she is not convinced, as Rachel tells Eve she is good at tying hair now as well. Eve notes that based on Rachel's reaction they should be safe for now. After taking care of Rachel for some time, there was a decision made to name her Ruby, as Eve tells Ruby she cannot wait to get her hair tied by Ruby as well. She then tells the pair to tidy up as they will have dinner soon. Eve notes that she knows her name is actually Rachel, but they cannot just tell her that at this moment. She tells the two kids she is glad they are getting along, as Eve notes Ruby is the perfect name for someone with her eyes. Eve then yells let's eat, as the food can be seen on the table before Rachel tells them to enjoy. Rachel then asks for Eve's hand as Eve obliges, with Zion staring on. Zion then asks Eve why Ruby will only eat cold food and why Eve holds her hand. Eve notes that she and Zion gravitate to warm foods due to being weak against the cold. A flashback is played where Eve offered Ruby a steaming bowl of soup. This causes Ruby to be visibly nervous, as Eve asks if 3 days of soup is too much, to which Ruby says it is fine. Eve was worried about the look on Ruby's face but was at ease when Ruby ate the food. Later that night, however, the warm food elevated Ruby's body temperature, which made her get sick. Eve realizes this is due to Ruby already having a lot of fire and heat in her body as a dragon, and she feels stupid for not realizing that. Eve notes this is the only thing she can do for Ruby as she activates an ice spell. Ruby stares at it before slowly drifting off to sleep. Ruby would soon recover after this. At the present, Eve tells Zion that Ruby eats cold food due to her fever still being high. She then pats Ruby's head and tells her to eat lots. Zion gets jealous and asks what about him, to which Eve pats him as well, saying he should make sure to eat as well. Now the three eat their meal harmoniously, as Eve then wonders how she is supposed to eat now. The next day we see Sion laying in bed in deep sleep. Eve puts a robe on as Ruby calls for Eve. She asks if Eve is going to the market again, to which Eve asks why she is up early and that she will be back soon. Ruby tells Eve to not go and stay here and sleep more. Eve tells Ruby she has to go so she can make money. She tells Ruby she needs to make lots of money, as Ruby asks why. Eve wants to say so that she can escape from the Crimson Cloak, who will murder her, but ends up saying to move to a nicer place. Ruby questions this before saying since that's the case, and starts to pick through her clothes, and then presents a ring and says she found it in the woods. Eve questions the fact that Ruby went into the woods, as Ruby apologizes and notes she knows Eve told her not to go there. Ruby gets nervous about not listening, as Eve notes to herself she told Ruby not to go in case the wolves started to mess with her. Eve tells Ruby the person who attacked her might still be around and that she knows it is hard to stay inside, but as she talks, Ruby's cute face starts to melt at Eve's heart. Eve then says that she will come home early today and that they will all have a snowball fight. Ruby asks really before Eve says she must stay inside until then though. Ruby nods her head as Eve calls her cute and says she must be sleepy so she should go back to bed. Eve then thanks her for the ring, saying she will keep it safe. The door closes as Ruby tells Eve to have a nice day. Ruby then turns and starts to mock what Eve said about keeping the ring safe. She says that she wanted Eve to sell it as she lights up the fireplace and calls Eve naive. IOWTF, what a slimy little reptile. A few days prior in the south we see Rachel is laying in bed looking ill. The lady touches Rachel's forehead as someone asks how she is. The lady says she is yet to find the cause of this and is doing her best to treat her, but nothing is working. She starts to mumble before saying the chief should prepare for the worst. This all began due to Rachel suffering from an unknown high fever. The chief says no as flames start to surround him. They blaze harder as he notes he cannot lose Rachel as well. He then starts to lose it in sweat as someone calls for the chief. The lady tells him that both him and Rachel will be in danger if he heats up right now. He tells her he lost control for just a moment and tells the lady to go back to looking over Rachel. Someone then calls for Nolier as he then asks if Rachel is okay. She says yes as she reaches her hand out. He starts to reach for her hand but then recalls what the lady had just told him. He puts his hand behind his back before saying Rachel scared him when she fainted all of the sudden. Rachel, still reaching her hand out, now pulls it back and clenches it. She starts to rise as Nolier asks if she is okay and if it hurts anywhere. Rachel then tells him no and that she just had a bad dream. Nolier wonders what his sister dreamed about. As he later notes, Rachel must have been thinking about that one legend and how the single-hearted dragon was about him. He shouts her name as he notes she has left to the south in secret to try and save him. He stares out the open balcony and then at the letter she left saying that she will return after taking care of that legend that haunts him. It would turn out to be much later until the chief realized she was in the north. At a huddle, one man kneels and tells the chief that they have spotted a girl that looks similar to his sister at Village Square. The guy notes that it seems his sister was with someone whose face was covered as the chief asks if the guy is certain. The guy says yes and that he saw the person buy his sister a dream catcher. The chief then scoffs, saying they are trying to sweet talk his sister with a dream catcher, noting how fearless they must be. He turns and says that he will go see for himself. As he steps away, he wonders how dare this person take his sister away, and notes that Wolf must be an arrogant B-word. Eve rubs her ear, wondering why it is itchy and if someone is bad-mouthing her. She notes the kids must be waiting and that she must hurry back before someone calls to her. The man tells her he is in a hurry and asks if she has the good stuff. She stares, wondering where this hobo came from. She notes she may be broke but still stands on one principle, which is to never engage in illegal dealings. She tells him no and ushers him to go away. She notes she always avoids selling to beggars as they always ask for certain things, as the guy says he was sure he heard it was around here. She also notes another reason is that they don't think clearly. The man points, saying the ring she has looks pricey, and tells her to sell it to him since it does not suit her. She notes this is a good example of what she said, as she is clearly mad at what the guy is saying. The man asks why she isn't telling him a price, to which she says 50 million gold, as the guy tells her this is ridiculous. He then asks if she is looking down on him. He then acts like a boomer and shouts about how back in his day, as Eve notes this is why she does not deal with them. She notes that this will make him come to his senses as she activates an ice spell that heads towards him. It hits his head as the man shouts before slumping over. Eve notes this is just her luck and decides to go see Zion and Rahul to get this sight out of her mind. As she walks, she turns to let him know that even if he had the money, she would not have sold this ring, as it is very precious to her. At night, Eve walks, noting that she must give this ring back to Rachel. Despite Rachel saying she found it, there is no way something like this was in the woods. Eve then notes the dragon is taking longer than she thought and notes she is scared but also thinks she'll be fine if she hides the fact that she is a half-breed. She notes the chief is supposed to love his sister dearly and she thought he'd be here sooner. She then realizes it might not be that easy considering how deep in the woods she hides and how she tells the kids to not come out. She then says hold on, and she starts to wonder if this all makes it look like she is a kidnapper. A rustle can be heard behind her as she wonders what that sound is. She wonders if someone is following her. She notes that if someone followed her this deep in the woods, she needs to be careful. She pulls out an apple and freezes it before saying she knows they are there and that they should come out now. Zion says the righteous wolf appears as he plays with his toys and Rachel sits at the table. Zion shivers as it is cold, which Rachel sees and notes that he must be sensitive to the cold. She wonders if she should make the fire higher before she notes she knows this feeling. She tells Zion she will be back in a second as Zion tells her Eve told them to not go outside. She then turns to yell at Zion that he does not have to listen to her at a time like this. She jumps out the door saying she has to go rescue her, to which Sion asks who. As she rushes, she says who else. She now fully dashes as she says her future sister-in-law. Narrator interjection, but this kid is literally matchmaking her brother right now. Eve stands alone wondering who is following her as she wonders if the brother is finally here. She then notes it couldn't be, as a dragon hybrid would just stand before her, and then wonders if it could be something else. She then wonders if the physician actually ratted her out. Rustles can be heard as it startles her, as she then clutches the apple and says, "There you are." She whirls it at the person and notes this is a bullseye. Silence ensues as she notes she did not hear anyone collapsing. She then yells, saying that unless they are a creep they should show themselves now. Silence again as Eve then notes there was no way the person is coming out that easy. She then flinches as we see many red eyes behind her. She notes that she knew there would be more than one, but this is way too many. She notes there is no way she can handle them all, as she then notices fire. She stares around her as fire fills up the forest, as she then recalls this is like when Rachel lit up the forest and killed off all the wolves, including herself, in the original story. She nervously clenches her apple as someone asks her if she is going to attack with a single apple. A man then steps forward asking where she is. It is the chief who asks where his sister is, as the flares completely surround Eve. The fire continues to burn as Eve tells him he has got it all wrong. She notes she can barely breathe, let alone speak properly. The chief steps forward asking if she has gone mute, as she breathes heavily and says she did not do anything wrong. He tells her to not try and trick him, as he is not merciful enough to listen to her nonsense. She notes that he seems certain she is a kidnapper, as she notes how unfair this is. She says when a person speaks you should listen to the end, as she grabs his arm and he stands in shock. He stares at her for a moment before pulling his hand backwards. They both are stunned as the ice and fire seem to mix around them before no flames remain. The other dragons all cough as the chief asks, "What are you?" Eve, completely exhausted, tries to talk about his sister, but cannot, as he asks what. She then pats his shoulder and tells him she kept her safe. She tells him 1,000,000,000 gold would not be enough to get her, as she wobbles over. She calls him a non-monetizable word, as we see he has caught her as she fainted. He yells "Miss" as Rachel yells for Eve from behind. The chief turns in shock as he yells Rachel's name, and she yells that he better not be hurting Eve and calls him a jerk. The winter wind blows outside as rattles can be heard in the vents. Eve blinks as she notices she is home and wonders if it was all a dream. She can recall Rachel shouting at her and wonders what she said. We do get to see for ourselves exactly what was said. Eve then springs up in bed and remembers the crazy dragon hybrid and notes this was not a dream. She is then suddenly hugged by both children, who shout her name. She tells the two they startled her and ask if they were next to her the whole time. The two ask if Eve is okay and if she is hurt anywhere. She tells them both she is fine and thanks them for worrying about her. Zion says he was scared because he thought she was dead. Rachel sniffles as tells him he was not the only one scared. Eve then notes that the two are acting as though she died. She then embraces them, telling them not to cry as she is fine now. She notes how nice it is for them to worry about her like this. Zion then tells Eve that the man went out for a bit but will be back. Eve then asks what man, as she notes to herself he must mean the Crimson Cloak's brother. She then recalls when she grabbed his wrist it felt like he was absorbing all her energy. She then realizes something as she then touches her head and back. She says thank goodness, as she notes she may have never woken up if the chief knew who she was. Just then he comes in, saying this door opens way too easily. He starts to speak as Eve notes they made eye contact, and in that moment only one thought came into her mind. It was the fact that he is freaking handsome, and she imagines him telling her he was worried she wouldn't wake up. She stares right now as she notes she was not able to get a good look at him last night, and notes he is gorgeous. He then asks her if there is something on his face, as clears her throat and says no. She tells him to have a seat here as a cup is placed down and filled with ice to the brim. The children grab at Eve as the whole table is completely awkward. The chief then tells them his name is Nolia Raymir, and that there are many things he'd like to ask her. He tells her before he does he'd like to apologize for what happened in the woods, and Eve tells him there is no need. She notes he is much more courteous than she expected and that he must still not know she is a wolf hybrid. She then glances at her brother as she notes she does kind of get why he attacked her. She grabs Zion, noting that if someone kidnapped him she would have been upset as well. She then clenches her fist, noting he did go overboard though, as she had almost died. She glances, noting she'll make sure he gives plenty of compensation before backtracking and saying maybe it wouldn't hurt to give him a break. He turns and asks if she is unwell as she clears her throat again, saying she is fine, noting to herself that her mind wandered off again for a second. She then asks what brings him here as he tells her he should have said it sooner. He says he is Rachel's brother and that he came here since she disappeared. The child, recently named Ruby, then asks who Rachel is as the chief notes his sister keeps pretending like she does not know. Rachel then hugs Eve, saying that that man is strange and keeps calling her little sister. Eve notes to herself that the man over there is definitely her brother, but she herself cannot say that directly, so she has to pretend to not know for now. Eve then says that Rachel keeps saying he is not her brother, so how can she trust him? He tells Eve he is not lying as he then asks for Rachel's hands. Eve tells her it will be fine and asks if Ruby can do as he says. She reaches out as both their hands generate fire, and the chief says this is proof. Ruby then jumps back and shouts. She then hugs Eve saying she was scared as fire was in her hand as Eve tells her it is fine and that she is holding her now. Zion then calls for Eve as Eve tells him he must be scared so she will explain. She then tries to explain before noting this will be hard since Zion has never seen any fire like this. Rachel then tells Eve that she is scared as Eve continues to tell her it is okay. Rachel then tells Zion to hold her hand, which confuses him. Eve notes this should calm Rachel down as the two kids then hold hands. The chief sighs as he wonders what in the world is going on. Eve then asks if Rachel feels better now as she says yes. We see her face and then see that she is smirking to the side. Someone tells Rachel to try and think hard about it and asks why she can't remember. Rachel turns away from her brother as she continues to hug Eve. Her brother then covers his face in annoyance. Eve thinks to herself about how she feels bad making this guy out to be the bad guy as she then tells him not to be upset. She tells him that Rachel seemed to have lost her memories when she found her. Due to his reaction, she would go on to tell Nolier everything that happened. He sits noting that Rachel passed out before gritting his teeth wondering if it was the wolves. Eve notes to herself she is in big trouble if he finds out she is a wolf as well. Nolier then calms down and asks if Eve is alright as she then gets confused. She then thinks he is worried due to what had happened previously. He then notes to her that he never had his fire extinguished like that before and that he is not sure how to take this. Eve notes to herself that in the original novel Nolier had the strongest magic and was someone able to control fire with just one heart due to the power he was born with. This would also mean his magic is very hard to control when he is emotional, and he could lose control at any time. Eve notes that she was able to extinguish the fire that not even Nolier could control, and she wonders if this is due to her being able to control ice magic. She then notes that there are plenty of more competent ice sorcerers than her though. She looks noting that he does not seem to know the reason for all this either. She then asks him if what happened was due to her ice magic and she tells him as he may know there are many wolf hybrids here who can use ice magic. He then turns and asks if that means she is a wolf to which she internally says oops. She says ahem again and says that she was just giving an example. She tells him she is actually before stopping and noting to herself how hard it is to say human. She then says I'm not a before Rachel grabs her and says Eve. Rachel tells Eve to send away the scary man as Eve stares at her and says ha. She tries to tell Rachel he is not a bad person and to look at how similar they both are. Rachel shakes her head and says he is bad as he tried to hurt Eve. She then asks Zion if she is right, to which Zion nods and says he is bad for hurting his sister. They both hug and say to protect Eve as she notes Zion is not helping matters. Rachel says he is big and scary as Zion agrees. She says he has red eyes, to which Zion starts to agree, before noting Ruby's eyes are red as well. She then gives him a death glare, to which he nods in agreement. The chief notes he is not sure what to do as Eve tells him not to worry as Rachel should recover soon. He then notes that even if he pretends to touch her like this before Rachel jumps away hugging Eve saying she will live here. Eve wonders what the heck Rachel is saying as she then tells Rachel she is making things awkward for her brother. She then turns and glares at her brother as Eve then tells Rachel she should not glare at her brother like that. Rachel then shouts saying no and that if she has to go to take Eve with her as well. Eve then tells Rachel she is really sorry and that she is a lovely child but they need to say goodbye here as Rachel needs to go home. Rachel then sniffles before crying as her brother sits silently. Her brother clenches his hand and sits nervously as Eve notes she just rejected Rachel, so Rachel should just say she'll go home now. Nolier then notes to himself that he must say it quickly as he has no choice. He then asks Eve if he can stay here for a while, which stuns Eve and makes her completely silent. She says pardon me. The chief tells her it will not be for long and to just let him stay until Rachel lets her guard down. The devil on Eve's shoulder asks her when she's ever gonna see a guy that's her type again. The devil tells her to just take care of them for a few days and enjoy the eye candy while she's at it. The angel on the other shoulder tells her this is nonsense as if she gets caught she is dead meat. Eve notes to herself it is true that she never gets tired of looking at handsome guys, but if he does find out she is a half-breed though she'll be roasted alive. She starts to say she is sorry, but the chief continues to say he knows it is a lot to ask considering the mistake he made. He then tells her to consider it as a favor for Rachel's sake as well. This strikes Eve's heart as she tells herself to pull it together and not fall for this. She then says ahem again and says she is afraid it won't be possible. He then tells her she will be generously compensated as she repeats the word compensated. She asks if that means he will pay her, to which he says of course. The two young children then stare at a stone-faced Rachel. She tells the children to go into the room. Later outside we see the chief tell Eve to consider the options he offered and to allow him to say it again. He apologizes, saying it is entirely his fault and he'd like to offer his sincere apologies again. She tells him not at all, as she'd have done the same. She notes to herself how all this is unexpected, as she thought he'd be a hot-headed chief. He then asks her not to be rude, but can he hold her hand. She says excuse me, as he tells her he just wants to check something and has no bad intentions. She says sure, as Rachel asks what that guy is still doing here. She then protects Eve from the guy. Her brother is shocked she's really going this far, as he covers his face. He tells Eve he should leave now, as she tells him goodbye. He bows, telling her to please explain things well to the children. Eve then asks Rachel if they should go back inside now. Eve then plops in bed, thinking about what a day it has been. She wonders if he wanted to touch her hand to know about her powers. She then notes whatever is, things will quiet down after this storm passes. She then notes there is one person who must be most confused. She then calls Rachel's name, as Rachel turns in bed, saying it is strange to be called by that name. Eve tells her it must be awkward before asking if she was frightened before. She tells Eve she was, as fire was coming out the guy's hands, as Eve says she sees. Eve wonders how she will persuade Rachel to like her brother, as Rachel asks how Eve felt. Eve notes to herself she was terribly scared then as well, but notes it is important to make this guy likable now. She tells Rachel yes, she was scared, but then asks if Rachel thought the guy was handsome. Rachel asks how was he handsome, as Eve says Rachel asks for exact details about what made him handsome, as Eve wonders if Rachel likes talking about these things. Eve tells her he is tall, as Rachel says it. She tells Rachel he has broad shoulders, to which Rachel asks if Eve likes that. Eve tells Rachel that is her type, as Rachel asks if Eve liked the face. She tells Rachel his face was out of this world. Rachel then says he is her ideal type then. Eve notes to herself she likes everything about him, but he is her enemy as a dragon though, and tells Rachel he is not exactly her type. Rachel droops down and says she sees. Rachel recalls that Eve said she wanted to get to know him better. Rachel then says that she will agree to meet with him. Eve asks really, and wonders if talking about his good points actually worked. Rachel says she will meet him 3 times a week, but she wants Eve to be there so she won't be scared. Eve hugs her, saying of course, and that this won't be a problem. Eve then notes 1 time should be enough, as Rachel insists on 3. Eve wonders if this is a good thing, as Rachel has her grin again. Later we see the chief with his men, who ask if Rachel is not coming with them. They then ask about the woman, to which Nolier notes to himself the moment she touched him the heat in his body dissipated. He clenches his fist, wondering what this could mean. He tells his men to assign more guards to her house and that they shall observe her a little more. All the men say yes chief, as they kneel. Zion comes into the room asking what Eve and Ruby are doing. Eve tells him they were talking about Rachel's brother, as Zion questions if they mean the man from before. Zion sits on the bed, telling Eve he does not like that man because he hurt Eve. Eve tries to tell Zion that the man just thought she was someone else and simply made a mistake before apologizing for it. Zion crosses his hands before saying that the guy was a stranger and that there are a lot of dangerous people out there. Zion also mentions that he hates how the guy calls Ruby by a different name. Eve thinks to herself about how she was able to persuade Rachel, but now Zion's a whole nother issue. Rachel then reminds Eve that she told them they could go out and play today. Eve says she did, as Rachel says she'd like to go now. Eve notes that they might not be able to since Zion says it's dangerous out there. Zion turns, saying it would be safe if they play near the house. His eyes start to sweat as he says he wants to go play outside too. Eve thinks about how maybe she should let them go out for a bit, but that she can't go outside with them as she is busy. She then tells them to promise that they will stay near the house, to which the 2 children agree. Zion runs out saying he's gonna make a snowman, while Eve reminds them to dress with warm clothes so they don't catch a cold. Narrator interjection, but that comment about wearing warm clothes reminds me a lot of my own mom. She used to make me wear at least 4 layers when it was cold outside. Rachel helps tie a scarf around Zion's neck as Eve tells them she will have a nice meal ready when they are back. She also mentions to not come home too late. The 2 children tell her yes and that they got it. As they rush out smiling, she tells them to come home right away if they see strange people. Eve grabs at her coat as she notes Rachel changed the subject at just the right moment. She then notes that it is now time to catch up on housework. The narrator sits smiling at the wholesome scene that just went down. Ruby is stepping through the snow as Zion asks Ruby how far they are going since they were told to stay nearby. Ruby then turns and asks Zion if he wants her to show him something he'd like. Zion wonders if Ruby is planning to give him stew, toys, or maybe a pat on the head from Eve. Ruby calls him childish as she then presents him with her hand. Fire flashes out of it as Zion stares in awe. His eyes beam as he tells her he likes this as well. Ruby tells him he likes her fire magic right as the story transitions back in time to a burning fireplace. Ruby notes this should be warm enough as the fire crackles on. Someone asks Ruby what's that as we see a sleepy Zion walk in. She shouts his name before Zion tells her that was amazing and to do it again. Rachel asks what he means as she did not do anything. Zion responds by saying he definitely saw that. Rachel says he was definitely dreaming, to which Zion says he'll tell Eve about this amazing dream later. Rachel shouts to wait and tells him she'll show him as long as he does not tell Eve. He laughs as he says alright. At the present day, Zion puts both his hands above her flame as he notes it is so warm. Rachel notes to herself it was great that Zion never told Eve and asks if he really does think it's warm. He tells her yes and says it's a small flame that does not go out, making it great. Rachel closes her fist as she wonders if she should sweet-talk this innocent soul. The cold air blows around them as Zion now shivers, wondering why she put it out. Rachel tells Zion that it is cold up here in the north. Zion agrees, saying he always asks Eve to move somewhere warmer, but she always says not yet. Rachel asks why that is so, since Eve always talks about wanting to go somewhere nice and mentions the south. Zion glances over, saying he will tell her if she lights the fire again. Rachel notes to herself Zion is just like Eve at times like this as she says fine and tells him to answer her. Zion, happily standing over the flame, tells Rachel that Eve always talked to him about how they needed to go somewhere else, an unknown place where they can have a fresh new start. Rachel says what, as she thinks about this unknown place. Her flame grows stronger as Zion notes how incredible this is. Zion also mentions that Eve spoke of needing money so they can have a noble title. Rachel stands wondering if Eve wants to live in a castle. Rachel then notes that the things Eve wants seem to be a good-looking man, a noble title with lots of money, and a place no one knows about, which Rachel thinks is somewhere with no wolves. Rachel then has a smirk as she notes all these things are something Nolier can provide. Zion says the flame is even larger now and calls Rachel amazing. Rachel then tells Zion that there is a way to make all of Eve's wishes come true all at once, to which Zion asks if that is really true. Rachel tells him that Eve just needs to follow that good-looking guy who was here, to which Zion says he was a bad guy though and he gave Eve a hard time. Rachel tells him the guy made a mistake and apologized, but Zion is still hesitant. Rachel reassures him that the guy is amazing and can give Eve everything she wants. Rachel also mentions that the guy can give Zion a warm place to stay. Zion says yay and says that sounds terrific. Rachel then tells Zion that she gets that he is happy, but he needs to hide his ears. A stunned expression can be seen on the boy's face. He then gets embarrassed, saying she did not see anything as he tries to cover the ears. She then laughs, saying he should hide his tail as well. Zion then asks if Rachel will tell Eve, to which Rachel tells him to promise her one thing. She tells him to promise her that he won't hate her brother. Rachel scampers away as Zion says to wait for him and asks if he has to call her Rachel from now on as well. She says he can just call her Ruby, to which he says he got it. The birds chirp and tweet as a knock can be heard at the door of the house. This appears to wake Eve up as she yells that she is coming. The door creaks open as she wonders who it could be this early in the morning. It turns out to be Nolier, who asks Eve how she has been. Side note, but my boy got the royal drip today. Eve, while looking all scruffy, notes to herself that she forgot today was the day Nolier was supposed to come. Later, after having freshened up, she tells him to excuse her unkempt presence as she got the dates mixed up. He tells him not at all and that it seems as though he came too early and disturbed her sleep. She tells him he did not as the pair step towards the children. Nolier notes the kids must still be in bed as Eve tells him they are sleeping soundly due to having played a lot yesterday. Nolier stares down at his sister, noting they must have had lots of fun. He touches her forehead as he asks Eve if Rachel caused any trouble. Eve tells him of course not and that Rachel is a very good girl. Nolier notes he has never seen his sister this fond of someone before. Eve sounds surprised by this and notes that his sister is so charming and cute though. Nolier then asks if his sister actually acts cute before a drowsy Rachel opens her eyes. The two ask if she is up as Rachel then says she knew the two of them would look good together. We then see her point of view. I would personally have to agree with Rachel. This stuns the two lovebirds as Rachel now snores back asleep. Eve laughs it off, saying Rachel must be dreaming. Eve continues to say that Rachel likes to say weird stuff in her sleep as she continues to laugh it off, but Nolier stands speechless. Eve notes he is making this more awkward by just remaining silent. Nolier asks if this is the first time, to which Eve says excuse me. Nolier asks if it really was the first time they met that one night. He mentions that for some reason she seems very familiar as Eve wonders what is with this cheesy pickup line. She tries to cover her laugh as she notes he probably did not say it with that intention, but it is hilarious. He stands confused before Eve turns around and says she doesn't think they have met before as she has been in the north all her life. Nolier says he sees as Eve tells him he must be mistaking her for someone else. She notes that was a cliche thing to say as Rachel now rustles awake. She says good morning to Eve and then notes that the man is her again. Rachel tells Eve she feels very hot and that she thinks a certain someone was touching her. Eve tells her she thinks it was her brother just gently stroking her hair. Eve wonders if dragon hybrids are supposed to be sensitive to heat, and if Rachel has grown accustomed to Eve's magic and the north. She then notes that she has never seen two siblings that are more awkward with one another. She decides to help them out a bit as she has come up with a plan. She says now before holding Rachel's hand. She then says that her brother can hold Rachel's other hand. She then says that this will help Rachel gradually get used to her brother's warmth as it is like a game of hot and cold bath. Rachel says she doesn't like this and tells them they should do this instead before yanking on the pair. She puts Eve and Nolier's hands together and says that she likes it better this way. Narrator interjection, but Rachel is so good at this we might be in the south sooner than I thought. Eve gets nervous and asks if she and Nolier have to hold hands as well. He stays silent, which prompts Eve to wonder if he does not like this. She loosens up her hand as she apologizes for holding on too tightly. Nolier says not at all before saying that he has never felt so cool before. Eve sweats and blushes, noting she must be a little nervous. Eve then asks if he is fine now as Nolier nods and says yes. With their hands clasped together, Eve notes she can feel his warmth and wonders if this is what he wanted to check last time. Their hands squeeze closer together. Zion then walks in the room and asks what the pair are doing. He then jumps forward saying that he wants to join as well. With his hand gone, Eve feels disappointed as she notes it felt so warm. Rachel then yells, calling Zion an idiot for just jumping in like that. Eve then tells Zion to mind his manners in front of guests and tells him to come sit with her. He yells saying he wants to play too as Eve wonders why he is so defiant today. She tells him Nolier is here to meet Rachel and tells Zion to stop being stubborn. She then thinks about how his ears and tail could pop out at any time. Nolier says he is fine and tells Zion that they were playing hot and cold bath before asking if Zion wants to join. He says definitely as he grabs Nolier's hand. His eyes then twinkle as he notes it is warm and toasty. He then puts Nolier's hand to his face, telling Eve it is so warm. Eve wonders who he takes after before a swish can be heard. Eve then sees Zion's tail is out and wagging as she internally shouts oh no. She notes they are in serious trouble. Eve glances over as she nervously tries to cover Zion's tail. She notes that Zion is practically melting and that she doesn't think Rachel or Nolier saw it. Eve wonders what to do as it is only a matter of time before Zion's ears pop out as she envisions an angry Nolier. Nolier then asks if Eve is feeling sick, to which Eve says no and that it is just a bit warm. Nolier's face droops as he notes that must be his doing, to which Eve internally shouts for him to not look down. She notes that she must make him look somewhere else before shouting that she is actually cold and then grabbing Zion's head and Nolier's hand. She then says it feels much warmer like this, to which Nolier says he is glad. Eve internal shouts for Zion to pull himself together as Zion is still dazed. Nolier then calls for Eve's name in confusion, to which Eve tells him his hands are as warm as roasted sweet potatoes. This further confuses him as Eve internally wonders what she is saying and begs for someone to help. Rachel then reaches and starts pressing down on Zion's head. She then asks Eve, isn't it cute when Zion's hair sticks out? Rachel notes it is like he has puppy ears as Zion gasps. His tail still swishing is then retracted as Eve notes this is a relief. Eve then notices she is still squeezing Nolier's hand before retracting and saying sorry as she did not realize. Nolier then tells her it is okay. Peep Rachel's reaction to all this, by the way. He then says that Zion was just being friendly. He also mentions that he himself was nervous Zion would be uncomfortable with him since he is a stranger. He then pats Zion, saying he appreciates Zion talking to him unlike Rachel. Zion then grins happily to this. He then goes in for a hug as he says he likes Nolier. Eve herself notes that her brother had such a quick change of heart. Eve tries to tell Zion to come here, but Rachel then grabs Eve, saying it's too hot. Eve nervously says she'll give Rachel a hug then. As she does so, she notes how chaotic this is and she hopes nothing else goes wrong. Eve tells Zion to stop bothering Nolier and to come over as Zion is dazed again, saying Nolier is like the sun. Nolier questions what he means by that, to which Zion tells Nolier it is because Nolier is big and warm. Nolier smiles, saying he never heard anyone call him that, and thanks Zion. Zion then stares up before saying Nolier is actually very good looking as well. He then mentions that Nolier is exactly like Eve's type. Eve sweats, wondering what the heck Zion is saying before asking if Zion is sleepy and to come over to her. She says he must be sleep talking as he is normally not like this before Zion mentions his sister again. To Eve's shock, Zion talks about how his sister likes men who can cry beautifully. Eve, now blushing, says she doesn't know what has gotten into her brother as Nolier is silent. She has now had enough before she then lowers Rachel down and tells her to wait. She then grabs Zion as Zion yells about wanting to be with Nolier. She internally wonders where this punk thinks he's going and who told him to talk about her type. There is then a flashback of when she teased Zion when he cried, and now she notes this has come back to bite her. Super awkward silence is in the air as Eve hopes Nolier did not hear that. He mumbles something about a man who can cry beautifully as Eve now internally shouts super non-monetizable words. It turns to evening as Nolier can be seen saying he has to go now to a silent Rachel. He tells the group he will come back soon as Eve, now having lost all her color, says alright and bye. He starts to speak again, which causes Eve to ask if he has something to say to her. He asks if she would like to, but then stops mid-sentence. He glances with his eyes at his sister before saying never mind. Rachel makes a sound of annoyance, to which Eve wonders if she heard something. Nolier then says he must really get going now as Eve waves him goodbye and he gives her a bow. Eve is silent as she wonders what he wanted to say. The wind blows violently as Nolier walks through the woods. He holds his hand up, noting physical contact with another person can be unpredictable and dangerous. He notes that since he has one heart, he has unintentionally killed many people, including his parents. His powers scare even himself as he cannot control them. He wonders how, as a hand then lifts his chin up. He wonders how Eve can pacify his powers so easily. He also wonders why he has cooled down even just at the thought of her. His hand clenches at his coat as his heart starts to throb and ache. He notes his heart feels like it is on fire. Flares can be seen burning as Nolier wonders why he starts smiling just by thinking about her. He notes that when he asks himself that question, the dream he had a few days ago comes to mind. Nolier glances around and wonders where he is. His arm throbs to his shock as he notes how much it hurts. Steps can be heard as someone is then seen walking through the fire. Nolier springs up in shock as he asks who is that. He notes he cannot see well due to his blurry eyes. He notes that if this girl comes any closer, he will put her in danger. He tries to tell the girl to not come, but notes that he cannot even speak properly right now. The steps get closer and closer as he shouts to not come here and tries to scoot away. A hand reaches for his hand as a flash now occurs. Nolier notes the pain is gone and wonders how. He asks who she is and asks her to tell him her name. She starts to tell him her name, but the screen starts to crack. The screen then shatters as we see Nolier now. He notes to himself that he only smiles because of the hope that this girl will be the answer to his problems. He notes to himself that love at first sight is just a concept you see in novels as he begins to march forward. As he dashes forward, he tells himself these emotions are just. He stops mid-sentence and turns around to see his sister marching towards him. Rachel asks him how dense he is as she calls him a fool and an idiot. She continues to say that he is a fire-breathing lizard as Nolier stands stunned. Rachel then says she feels better now having gotten all that out. She then notes it might be best this way as Eve gets easily frightened, so it'd be more dangerous if they suddenly take her with them. Nolier then asks Rachel how she got here as she yells at him, saying that is not important. Rachel then tells him Eve likes men who cry beautifully and asks if he heard that. Nolier starts to talk, but Rachel tells him she is not finished. Rachel then rambles on about what Nolier needs is to be good looking with broad shoulders and a noble title. Nolier asks why she is saying all this as Rachel then lets out a sigh. She then shouts asking if he gets it and then blatantly tells him he meets all the requirements, so what is he hesitating for? She then asks if he's denying his emotions right now. Nolier, all flustered, starts to say these are not those kinds of emotions, to which Rachel asks if he really doesn't know that he has fallen for her. Nolier is still flustered and confused before Rachel winks and says that she will help him. She then tells him to never forget that confidence is what makes a man. Bro, Rachel is acting like the older sibling, lol. Honestly though, sometimes you need siblings like Rachel, the ones that snap some sense back into you and that help you understand how you truly feel. Later in the morning, Rachel awakened to some noise. She turns to see Eve near the door. Rachel then runs and hugs her, asking if she is going out. Eve asks if she woke Rachel up and says that she needs to step out for a bit. Rachel asks if Eve is really going out to sell herbs and also asks if Nolier did not give Eve any money. Eve tells Rachel he gave her a lot of money but that she is going out to meet a friend today. Rachel questions this as Eve says she'll be back soon and that Rachel should not worry and go back to bed. Rachel says okay as Eve pats her head. Rachel says have fun as Eve says she will be back soon. Rachel then turns angrily as she notes Eve took her herb basket. She notes that she is sure Nolier gave her enough though. Rachel wonders if Eve is not satisfied with the amount. Rachel then pulls over a treasure chest of gold coins and notes that her future sister-in-law is quite ambitious. Rachel then notes Eve did look quite excited for someone going out to sell herbs and wonders if she is actually going to meet a friend. She then envisions someone calling Eve. Eve slips off her hood and that friend turns out to be a boyfriend. Rachel's mouth falls in shock at the thought of this and wonders if the reason Eve needs money is to move away with her boyfriend. Rachel internally shouts no as she wonders how she did not consider this possibility. She then decides to go see for herself as Zion asks Ruby where she is going. She turns to see a yawning Zion. Rachel says she needs to go somewhere as Zion asks where and if he can go too. Rachel notes this is exactly why she wanted to come back home quickly before she tells Zion to stay here as it is cold and boring where she is headed. Zion says he is curious though as Rachel notes he probably will follow her no matter what. She wonders what if he gets lost though and then says he can come along as Zion shouts yay. She tells him to promise that he will stick by here, to which Zion promises. The door creaks open as Rachel shouts it's time to go look for her future sister-in-law. As Eve walks in the woods she recalls back to when Rachel asked her about Nolier's payment. Eve sighs as she notes to herself he did give her money and lots of it at that. 2 bags are dropped on the floor with a loud crash. The gold glitters as Eve stares at it. She asks what this is, to which Nolier says he mentioned it last time. Eve stares wondering how much this is and notes that she thought he'd despise her for having weird taste in men. She looks up and wonders why he looks so pleased about giving her so much money. She tells him this is too much as Nolier notes it is rather little and he can give more if you want. Narrator interjection, but having a rich Mr. Beast type boyfriend sounds nice, not gonna lie. Eve is stunned as she notes to herself that she'd like to ask how much more he would give her. She does note that she cannot give in to these wolf instincts of hers and must decline. Nolier then tells her to not feel bad about accepting this and that he can give her as much as she wants. She is awestruck by how much he sparkles before she gulps. She then says that she does not mean to be rude, but could she give him this to get something more valuable? She then imagines saying something like his smile. She continues to envision him saying her name as she says yes. She then hears her name called again and again before snapping back to reality. She says yes while stunned before staring at the gold in her hands. She then slaps her hand as she tells him she'll ask him later if she needs more. She notes that her wolf instincts are coming out again. She then tries to recall if he said she can have as much as she wanted. She wonders what he would do if she asked for an enormous amount while Rachel winks to her brother. She then notes to herself that there is actually a very innocent side to this guy though. She recalls him blushing when they held hands and that shy guys are just her type. She then notes that putting his smile aside, this will be her last day selling herbs since she has plenty of money. Someone then calls for V and asks how she has been. The man says it has been ages as Eve says hello. She notes that this man is a regular customer who is knowledgeable in many things. He is also a merchant who travels to many regions that sometimes shares interesting stories. The man then asks V if she got what he asked for as she tells him she barely managed to find them. The man talks about how the tigers in the West are enjoying herbs now since vegetarianism is a new health craze. Eve notes some of the stories sound too amazing to be true. She tells him she packed lots this time as this is her last day of business, to his shock. He tells her she cannot do this so suddenly and asks where he is gonna get his herbs from now, to which V says he'll have to find another way. He asks if that is all there is between them, to which she says yes, that is all. She then asks if he brought info, to which he asks if she is referring to the broker who can get her to the human world. The man then asks if V knows they have a new chief now. V asks if he means the chief of the north and that this happened a long time ago, so what about it? The man mentions this chief has been capturing brokers and notes that they are now cracking down on illegal entries more now. V is in shock as she wonders why now of all times, before the man says it won't be possible right now. He then asks if she has a lot of time and tells her to wait for things to be less strict. V notes to herself she does not have time before the man tells V he has a parting gift for her. He then hands her something wrapped in a cloth. She asks what it is, to which he says they are rare herbs you can't find anywhere nowadays. She asks if they are a non-monetizable substance, to which he says kind of. She calls him a lunatic, saying she does not need it as he says to watch out. He tells her she is more gullible than she looks as he places it in her basket. He tells her to try it out later as she will experience a whole new world. She says over her frozen dead body and that she'll get rid of it on her way back. He laughs, saying that are in the north so nobody could die of a heat stroke. Eve notes to herself she actually could get burned to death though. The man then says he is off and thanks her for everything. She waves as she stands in silence. Eve droops her head down and notes she thought she could leave right away since she's got all this money, but now there is a crackdown. She decides to just go home first. As she holds her basket she runs, wondering if she'll have to take care of Rachel for a bit longer. She thinks about how she could save up even more money for the human world. She then notes that if she does do that, what would happen when Nolier finds out she is a wolf hybrid. She shakes her head, telling herself to not think negatively and is sure there is a way. She then decides to look at her cuties first and forget about all this for now. She hears a creak to her shock as she then wonders why the door is like this. She yells, telling the kids she is back, but is then stunned. She calls for Rachel and Zion and drops the basket. She notes that they are gone and dashes out, hoping nothing has happened to them. Eve runs out shouting their names as she notes they are not in the woods nearby either. She then wonders if they went to the square. Eve notes that Rachel does not look like a northerner, so they will notice her immediately and must find Rachel quickly. She bolts off while saying please be their kids and runs off into the woods. In the bustling city, people are chattering. Eve then bumps into someone who tells her to watch where she is going. She ignores him as she notes the kids are not here. She notes they are not in the alley where she was with Rachel and not on the streets either. They are at this point nowhere to be found. She dashes again, wondering where they have gone, and notes she should have told them to be more careful. She then bumps into someone again before saying sorry, and the man asks if she is okay. The man then says Eve as she now looks up. She notes it is Nolier who asks if something is wrong and if something happened. Eve is fully teary-eyed as she tells him the kids are missing, to his shock. She tells him she left them at home and internally yells that it is her fault. She notes that she was only thinking about money as she tells Nolier they were nowhere to be seen when she came back. She finds herself to be the one responsible in the end. As she cries, she now shouts aloud saying it is her fault before Nolier tells her to calm down first. She wipes her tears as she notes she has to pull herself together. She apologizes while bowing and says she will go look for the children as Nolier says wait. She continues to bolt as he calls her name. As she runs, she internally tells the children to please be safe. We later see Zion shouting Ruby's name. He is clearly scared as he asks if she is sure they are in the right place. She tells him it was around here somewhere as Zion tells her he does not think it's here. The men behind them laugh as Zion pleads with her to go back. Rachel says they need to find Eve, but Zion says he is scared. She tells him not to cry as she hates crybabies, to which Zion says Eve likes men who cry. Rachel says that is what Eve likes and not what she likes. Zion can't form words anymore as he is teary-eyed. Rachel tells him to not follow every strange thing Eve likes as Zion shouts his sister is not strange. Rachel says she never said that, but does note that Eve has a strange taste. Zion yells asking what is wrong with what Eve likes. Rachel asks who likes people that cry, to which Zion says at least 1 or 2 people in the world could like this. Rachel says her brother never cries as Zion says to not say mean things about his sister, to which Rachel asks when did she say that. The two men then chatter about what the kids are talking about as Rachel then says whoops. She notes she needs to be more careful and tells Zion that they should just go then. Zion then says he does not want to go with her anymore as she yells what. He says he is going to find Eve himself as Rachel shouts for him to stop right there. Huffing and puffing is heard as Rake notes that if Zion goes any further he'll attract attention in the middle of the square. She then says she has no choice and then starts to flare up. She tells him she said to stop as fire then surrounds Zion. The blaze causes him to jump as he notes this is the fire that he likes. Rachel, while tired, tells him she never said she hated Eve. Rachel says that she thinks her future sister-in-law is the best regardless of her tastes. Rachel then notes that this is better now and that she knew when it comes to sweet-talking wolves, fire is the best tool to use. Some creep now stands behind her as he says fire. Rachel turns in shock as she notes there was no one here before. The guy smirks before asking if she can control fire. She tells him he must be mistaken as he asks Rachel if she thinks he would not know just because she has a hood on. He also says that she did that as well while pointing to the fire. Zion says Ruby in fear as she tells him to stay behind her. She notes this man does not seem to be able to focus his eyes, so this could be really dangerous. She starts some fire as she tells him to mind his own business and go away. The man then jokes saying he is scared and asks if she is a dragon kid. She tells him not to come closer and that if he does not stop there she'll have to use this. The guy then spots the ring and says he has seen that before. The guy then recalls back to the man he saw last time as he then smirks. She laughs as the two kids stand in shock. He then says how dare a dragon come to the north before grabbing Rachel's collar. He asks what a filthy dragon like her wants to do. He then tells her to stay still and that the two of them are young so they will fetch a good price. Zion then yells no as he attacks, yelling to put Ruby down. The guy then says why you before smacking Zion to the ground. The guy then notices the ears and calls Zion a mongrel before noting how a dragon hanging out with a mongrel is a funny combination. Rachel says she must protect Zion but notes she cannot breathe. A flare can then be heard to the lunatic's shock. He shouts oh no as he is in flames. Zion yells for Ruby as we hear someone say how cocky of you. It is Nolier who talks about how this man has the audacity to mess with little children. He steps forward as the children shout his name. Nolier then reaches and grabs the back of the man's shirt. Nolier then proceeds forward as the man shouts and tries to pat out the flames. Nolier then kneels down with his cape fluttering as the two children stare. He starts to ask how they are as the man behind him calls for help and that it is hot. Nolier then angrily wonders what he should do about this wolf who does not know his place. He notes that he is sure killing one wouldn't hurt. As the shouts can be heard, Nolier then gets stunned. He hears hiccups as someone is patting his hand. Zion tells Nolier to please stop and that he is scared. Nolier starts to speak but Zion squeezes his finger harder. Nolier then tells the two that he is sorry. He notes to himself that he is blinded by the slight peace he felt and he forgot the person who he truly is. He notes that he has always wanted to fight wolves as they are his natural enemy, but then wonders what if he frightens her as well. His heart throbs as he then feels pain and notes that it feels like his heart sank to the bottom of his stomach. The doofus notes that the flames have gone out before he yells that Nolier tried to kill him. He yells asking how dare a dragon mess with a wolf and says that this means war. He tells them he is going to see the chief before he gets whacked unconscious. Nolier notes it is a frozen apple as someone speaks about going to the chief. Eve then says how dare you and calls the dude a worthless piece of trash. Another whack can then be heard as the man hits the floor with a thud and Rachel yells for Eve. She grabs the guy calling him a lunatic and shakes him saying he messed with the wrong person. She tells him she knew he was trouble ever since she saw him buying that good stuff. She grabs the apple and says people like him deserve to die. Nolier then tells her to calm down as he grabs the apple to her shock. She asks why he is stopping her, to which he says she is getting too worked up. She tells him that this man is better off dead as she tells Nolier to let her go. Rachel then calls Zion's name. She then asks Zion if Eve has to be her sister-in-law, to which Zion asks what she means. Rachel blushes as she asks if Eve can just be her bride instead. Oh, so that's what we are doing now, huh? You know what? I'm throwing myself in the mix as well because the narrator also wants Eve to be his bride. Eve slumps over as she is panting and exhausted. Nolier calls her name and then tells her to excuse him for a moment. He then asks if she is more relaxed now as he holds her head up. She now flinches after finally being out of the daze and then asks what she has done. Nolier notes that he thinks she has finally calmed down now. He tells her he is sorry for touching her but he just wanted to help. She is bashful as she tells him it is fine and that she appreciates him helping here. We then hear Zion call for Eve and ask if she is alright. She yells his name as Zion is teary-eyed and looking for a hug. She grabs his shoulder before telling him she told him not to go out as he tells her he is sorry. She asks if he knows what great lengths she has gone to keep all this from happening. She clenches her teeth as she asks what if he got hurt. She asks if he knew how worried she was about him. Zion tells her he is sorry and that she should not cry. They then hug as Eve says she is so glad that he is safe. Eve then hears another individual calling her name. It is Rachel who says sorry and says that it is all her fault. She says she was the one who told Zion to come, to which Zion then says he was the one who asked Ruby. He says that he threw a tantrum and ran away as well. Eve then hugs the two of them and says that it's her fault as she should have never left them alone. Rachel then cries as she says it was all her fault because she said Eve has strange taste in men. Zion sobs as he says she never said that and that Ruby only said it was unique. Eve is still sniffling but is comically stunned by what the kids are saying. The two children then apologize to each other while they hug Eve. Things to note is that Rachel says she will get Nolier to be better at crying and Zion says Eve does like strange boys and asks who in the world likes men that cry. Eve hugs them but does tell them to stop talking about this. We can also now see that Nolier is laughing as well before he notices that she sees him. He apologizes and says that he just found this situation very amusing. Eve laughs as she notes to herself her tastes must actually be unique. She then tells all of them to stop crying and to go home. She tells them to say thank you to Nolier before they go as Nolier stands awkwardly. Zion hugs Nolier and thanks him as they would be in big trouble had he not come. Nolier tries to tell Zion that he should not be thanking him but then notices that his sister says thank you as well. She then says his name as Nolier now has a grin and says her name. Rachel glances over as he now offers her a hug. Rachel then smiles as the siblings finally share a happy moment. Zion tells Eve he is hungry as she tells him they can get food while they are here and asks if he'd like anything. She turns to see Rachel and Nolier going through a game plan or something. Nolier says that Rachel forgot something in the alley, to Eve's shock. Eve says she will go with Rachel and asks what she forgot. Rachel grins and says she will go with Nolier as it is a secret. Nolier says he will go with Rachel and tells Zion to go home first. The siblings hold hands as they rush away. Eve notes the two have grown closer as the dork from before asks what they are doing to him. He says they beat him up already and asks if that wasn't enough. It most definitely was not enough, you low-life idiot. Rachel says what he got before was payback for Zion and herself. She tells him that he now must pay for making her future sister-in-law sad. The man's cry of agony is quite satisfying. Later at the house we see Eve tucking the children to bed as someone asks if everything is alright. She then turns to see Nolier and tells him they look so peaceful. Nolier tells her that was not what he was asking as she confusingly says sorry. Nolier says he wants to know if Eve is alright, which stuns her. He reaches his hands out as he tells her that her face is swollen. She feels it and tells him that she is fine. She notes that she was just so startled that she reacted without realizing before saying it was all her fault with a smile. Nolier tells her it wasn't before he tells her that he feels like she is trying to carry everything on her shoulders. He tells her not to be too hard on herself for what happened with the kids and that she is doing more than enough for them. He crouches over as he tells her she was just trying to protect after all. As a narrator and as an honest person, I now take back my desire for Eve to be my bride, as Nolier is the only man suitable for this prestigious honor in my eyes. They will make a fine couple that even the heavens envy. Nolier now tells Eve that even if she says she is alright, maybe he could. Eve then springs up, interrupting him, thinking for a moment before saying she has to go get herbs. He calls her name as she dashes away and slams the door shut. The wind blows outside as Eve notes too many things happened today. She notes that she only feels this way since she was scared before. She notes that she is sure that is why her heart is pounding like crazy right now. She says she will go back in after relaxing a bit before letting out a loud sneeze. The next day we see Eve continue to sneeze as Rachel asks if she is alright. Eve notes she cannot believe she got a cold just from stepping outside and wonders how this could happen to a northerner like her. She tells them she is fine and that she is not going to die. Nolier then tells Eve to excuse him for a moment as he reaches for her. He tells her that she has a high fever and that he should go get her medicine. She then tells him that there are medicinal herbs over there and that they just need to boil it. She apologies for making a guest do this as he tells her no problem and that he will do it now. Zion says he wants to help as Rachel reminds him he cannot control fire, so she will help him. The group then wonder which one is it as someone mentions it could be the pretty plant. Eve's eyes close as she watches them talk about having never seen the blue plant before. One last blink and she is out cold. Later someone yells Eve multiple times and tells her to wake up. Nolier tells her it is all done and to drink a bit before going back to sleep. She notes her head hurts so much as Nolier tells her to drink it while it is warm and that it would make her feel better. As she sips, she then notes how disgusting it is. She wonders if it was always this bitter. Nolier then helps her out and tells her to sleep some more and that he will put the rest on the table so she can drink it when she gets up later. He tells her that he and the children will go get clean water. Eve notes to herself that it may be due to her sickness, but a single touch from him makes her heart go back and forth between heaven and hell. He has his hand on her forehead as she notes it is so warm. As she felt his caring touch, she would then fall asleep again before she knew it. It is then noted that she had no idea what was going to happen to her. She blinks her eyes open as she wonders if she was asleep for a long time. She wonders if they brought water yet as her hand pats the blanket. She then holds up her hand wondering if this is hers. She then wonders what is with this tail. She says what the heck as she wonders if she turned into a wolf. The man from before really did give her that good non-monetizable stuff. The bed where Eve rests glistens with a white light. As she starts to get up, Eve wonders how long she's been out. Her tail wags as she wonders if her family is back with the water yet. As it continues to wag, she notes how soft somebody's tail is. That is until she starts to realize things. She grabs at the tail with her hand while in a state of shock. This then prompts her to stare at her hand, which has now become a paw. She then wonders if she has fully become a wolf as she sits stunned on top of her bed. She grabs at her face, noting how this cannot be true and that there's no way it's possible that she has suddenly transformed into an animal. She then tells herself that this must be a dream as she was very sleepy earlier. She then curls around in bed and tells herself to calm down. Eve says to herself that if she closes her eyes and counts to 10, then things should definitely return back to normal. The countdown begins as she begins to sweat and feel anxious. She finally has that get real with yourself moment as she tells herself there is no way this is a dream and that she is totally in denial. She wonders how the heck this even happened as her nose then catches a whiff of something in the air. She continues to sniff as she then realizes the scent is from the cup right next to her that is filled with that good stuff. She wonders if this cup was what caused everything that's happening to her, especially since the smell is awful and that she only realizes this now as her nose is no longer stuffy. She then definitely recalls telling Nolier to use the herbs she had and him agreeing to that. Wolf Eve then hops from the bed as she notes the plants should not have had any side effects. She crawls up the seat and table as she wonders if he mixed something else into it. Atop the table she stares at a blue powder. This prompts her to wonder if Nolier fed her those super rare herbs that one dealer gave her. She curses the dealer as she notes how he should have kept them for himself if that were that rare. Eve then wonders what she should do now. Ever since she remembered her former life, she has never fully transformed into a wolf. She wonders how she can turn back before wondering what if the dragons come back before she can revert to her human form. She imagines them becoming enraged at her for lying and notes that she'd be dead. She then starts to crawl and tells herself that she must get out of here first. She jumps at the door as she decides to return after the medicine has worn off. The issue is that she currently has paused, so opening the door becomes a real struggle. She continues to scratch and tap before it finally opens. Rachel starts to walk and saying she's sure Eve is asleep and that it's important to rest when you're sick. Eve is completely in disarray and she throws out a non-monetizable word. Rachel then notices her as Eve starts to look saddened. Chills can be felt as Rachel wonders who this is. Poor Eve starts to quiver and shake in fear as she wonders if Rachel ever made this expression before and if Rachel has realized who she is. Zion then walks in yelling Ruby. Zion calls this odd as Eve notes he probably won't know it's her either. Eve notes how they've lived deep in the woods together since he was born, so he's never seen any wolves or his sister in her wolf form either. Zion then starts to mention how the ears and the tail both look very familiar to him. Eve hopes he doesn't know it's her, but Zion starts to yell it is his sister before Rachel covers his mouth saying it is a puppy. Rachel says she recalls seeing one before and that this is definitely a puppy. Zion mentions how if she recalls seeing a puppy then that must mean her memory is back. Rachel glares at him in silence as Eve notes how perceptive her brother is today. Zion then says he wants to show the puppy to his sister before wondering where she is. Zion then starts to act like Light Yagami as he deduces how his sister is gone and how there is suddenly a puppy in the house. Eve internally yells at him to stop trying to solve things and how now is not the time to be clever. Zion seems to have gotten a boost in IQ as he notes how these two things must be connected. Eve now starts to act like a cute dog as she notes how this will no doubt distract him. Zion then shouts yelling at how cute the puppy is and pets it. Rachel is shocked and speechless. She then sighs saying she knew it was a puppy as Eve notes how she is almost hurt by how they're buying this. Rachel says that Eve likely stepped out to cool off since Eve must have felt hot from her cold. Zion says he sees, as Rachel then wonders what in the world Eve is thinking. Zion yells Ruby's name as he tells her to look at the puppy's toe beans. Eve is internally crying as she internally asks if her brother is enjoying this, especially since his sister must do all this squirming to avoid getting killed. Rachel then calls Zion a fool and says that is not important. She tells him that Nolier will be back soon and asks what they should do. Eve then gasps as she notes how she was so focused on the kids she forgot about him. We then hear the man's voice as he tells the kids they got back before him. His boots can be seen as Eve calls him her final boss. His shadow descends on the house as Eve notes he has arrived. He then asks what that thing is doing here. Excuse me, sir, but for your information, that thing is your future wife, by the way. Eve lets out a soft bark as she notes how screwed she is. She wonders if she should try acting cute before thinking about how Nolier won't easily fall for it like the kids. She then trembles as she wonders what she needs to do. Rachel then shows up and hugs Eve as she tells Nolier it is a puppy. Nolier says what as Rachel says she will raise the puppy and tells him to not touch it. Rachel tells him that if he plans on living with her, he better not think this is just some ordinary puppy. Nolier then calls Rachel's name as he wonders why she is behaving so strangely right now. Nolier then internally says wait as he then starts to glance around wondering where Eve is. He notes how the table is a mess before seeing how her bed looks like she got up and left in a hurry. He then recalls how this puppy suddenly showed up as well. This causes him to jolt and shock as he wonders if this could mean what he thinks it means. Nolier covers his mouth as Eve notes how his expression has gotten worse. Eve wonders if Nolier will burst out in anger and cause trouble for even the kids as well. She then internally says no as she squirms. She tells herself she must do whatever she can to prevent that from happening. She stands firmly in front of Rachel and her brother as if protecting them like a good mother would. Look at Eve, man, so inspirational. As Eve stares at Nolier, she feels chills running down her spine from fear. She has a gulp before moving her paw. She then taps his boots and goes full on Puss in Boots mode as she hopes that he will fall for her being cute trick just this once. We see twitching from Nolier's face as Eve then whimpers, wondering if it worked. She then is in shambles as she cannot believe she will end up dying as a wolf. That is until she hears the words "how cute." Eve lets out a soft bark as Nolier now kneels down, saying he finally is starting to see what Rachel means. He notes the color of the eyes and the sheen of its fur all remind him of a certain cuteness he's seen before. He then lets out a smile. Eve wonders if he really fell for it as he starts to pat her on the head. He then scratches her chin as Eve now appears very pleased and notes how she is fine with doing this if it means she can live. Nolier himself chuckles as he notes how Eve did not have to go this far. He is then silent before telling Rachel he will be back after getting some firewood. Rachel asks what about the puppy, to which Nolier smiles and tells her to take good care of it as it must be lost. Rachel then beams with a smile as she hugs on tightly to Eve. Rachel asks when he will be back, to which he tells her he won't be back soon as he must go far. He then mentions that it appears as though Eve has gone out for a walk and that he needs the two kids to watch the house. He tells them he shall be back as the door creaks closed. He stands outside in silence for a moment before slumping over, noting how he almost ended up being aggressive again. He looks like Sasuke in this frame as he notes how he cannot believe that the wolf is Eve. He also notes how he would have no doubt attacked if Rachel had not stopped him. For some reason they show us his nape before we see him seated on the stairs. Unlike my alcoholic dad, Nolier starts to wonder what he should do to fix this rage issue that clouds his judgment. Nolier also wonders what to do about the powers he cannot hide and his true feelings. From the inside, the door has closed quietly as both Eve and Rachel breathe a sigh of relief. Rachel tells Zion they should get to bed now as Zion asks why so soon as he still wants to play. Rachel says puppies need to go to bed early as she internally notes how Eve can revert back to normal more comfortably if everyone is asleep. She then tells puppy Eve that it is time and pulls a blanket over them. Eve starts to lick Rachel as thanks since Rachel saved her life from Nolier. Eve then sadly wonders how she can change back as the most pressing matters have all been dealt with now. She then starts to wonder what if she cannot revert back. That is until she starts to get sleepy while wondering if she is still feeling the effects of the medicine. She notes that she's sure everything will be okay if she just rests for a little bit. We can then see hair drifting in the air as we see the family peacefully sleeping together while Eve tells herself what a hectic day it has been. Side note, but where did the clothes come from, lol? The fire continues to burn and crackle at the fireplace as the three continue to snooze in bed. Nolier comes in with a smile as he notes his girl is back to normal. He tucks her more carefully in the blanket as he notes she must have been startled when she suddenly changed into an animal. He then starts to note how adorable she looked then. He then sits in silence to himself before wondering how Eve would react if he told her he already knows she is a wolf. He wonders if she would run away. He notes how he at first used Rachel as an excuse to stay close to Eve and find out who she really was. He mentions that if she really is the wolf in the legend, then he must take his heart back from her. The gruesome scene of Nolier standing over a dead wolf can be seen as he then notes that the more time he spends with Eve, when she would tell the kids to be careful and how she'd call him Noel and tell him to be careful as well, the more he feels emotions that he had never felt before. His heart throbs as he says he does not want to hurt her and truthfully just wants to stay beside her. As he sits in the room, he sadly notes that in order to do this he will need to do one thing. He must get her to choose him. Eve mentions how it is cold in bed as Nolier notes he must become a man that she likes. He reaches over and touches her face as he notes he would warm her up as much as she wanted if only he could control his powers. Eve makes a noise as Noel pulls his hand back. Eve mumbles about how warm they felt before grabbing Noel's hand. He then gets pulled in and a plop can be heard. Noel blushes as he then notes how crazy his heart is beating right now. He covers his face as he feels like he's floating right now and also sinking at the same time. As he clasps her hands and in the midst of the chaos in his heart, he decides to pray to a God that he has never sought before. He tells God that if you truly exist, to please let him be the one Eve chooses and loves. Narrator interjection, but I feel so single right now. The birds chirp as Eve wonders if it is morning already. She yawns as she notes how everything feels much warmer than usual today. She then jolts in bed as she then wonders why it is warm. She awakens to see Noel, who has fallen asleep right by her bedside. She then blushes as she wonders why he is holding her hand. She wonders if he held her hand because it was cold last night before blushing even more and saying no way. She fumbles around looking for her ears and tail as she says she hopes he didn't see it. She then gets chills as she wonders if he held on to her hand so he could interrogate her when she wakes up. She then ponders on whether she should run away now as Noel seems to have risen up from his sleep. He calls her name as she nervously tells Noel good morning while pulling back her hand. He then grips onto her hand again as he asks if she is still cold. She says excuse me as he tells her that her body temperature dropped a lot after she went walking yesterday, so he was warming her up. Eve wonders what in the world he is saying before starting to realize that he must have thought she went out for a walk yesterday. He had gone to get firewood, and by the time he came back, Eve changed back to normal. Eve then gasps as she yells, asking if she was the one who took his hand after getting cold, to which Noel nods. He nervously tells him that she is normally not like this and thanks him. Noel internally notes how cute she is. He then pulls on his cape as he tells her he will be going for now. Eve turns to Rachel and tells Rachel that since her memories are back, she should go home with her brother. Rachel then glistens as she says she does not remember anything. Eve falls for it again but does not. This is odd as she pats Rachel's head and tells her she should stay here longer then. Eve then tells Noel she is sorry for the hand thing earlier, to which Noel says to not give it a thought, but Eve insists it must have made him uncomfortable. She tells him if there is anything he needs help with, she'd be happy to help. Noel asks if she really means that, to which Eve says as long as it is something she can do. He then leans over, saying to pardon his forwardness, and asks if she could please pat him on the head. Eve says pardon as Rachel starts to fangirl right behind them. Rachel wonders why he is being so forward all of the sudden, but decides she should help him nonetheless. Rachel then yells, saying Zion is calling for her, so she'll go back inside, to Eve's shock. Eve notes how it will be awkward with just her and Noel as Noel calls for Eve again. He asks if he can feel her touch as it causes the heat in his body to cool down. Eve notes how close he is to her as she mentions they should hold hands then. He tells her that is good too, but mentions that it'd be more effective if she touched his head. He then slowly asks if patting his head is too much to ask as he holds onto his heart. Eve's heart explodes as she notes to herself how could she say no to a face like that. Noel looks down as he says it appears as though he was asking for too much. He continues to say that he was so taken by the memory of what happened last night as Eve then yells aw. She tells him to not talk about holding hands in such a strange way, especially since kids could get the wrong idea. She then yells, saying she will pat his head before grabbing his face. She then asks if this is okay as Nolier closes his eyes and nods. Eve notes how hard her heart is beating right now. Nolier opens his eyes as he mentions the sight of a wolf whose heart is racing, and that is caressing the dragon chief must be a very strange sight to see. A bird's eye view of the scene can be seen from above as flowers bloom even though there's snow. A few days later, we see Eve warning someone to make sure to never remove their hood in the square. The two children tell her yes with smiles on their faces. Eve notes that the incident from before only happened because she left the kids home alone. So to make sure they always stay by her side, Eve has decided to allow them to join her on her outings. Zion tugs at Eve's coat as he yells her name. He asks if they can go there, to which Eve asks if he means the bookstore. Eve then notes she could use this chance to stock up on some human world books. She tells Zion yes, but that he has to stay quiet, to which Zion yells he cannot wait. The door jingles as the kids scurry ahead of Eve, who notes they seem to be excited at just the sound of a bell. Eve hopes the kids' hoods won't slide off as something then catches her eyes. She runs over to some books as she notes how they sell adult novels here and wonders who the author is. This causes her to recall back to the novels she used to read before becoming Eve, and about how she liked reading about when male protagonists would cry over the heroine. Eve really is that weird lol, but in a cute way. Eve gulps as she notes how she could read just one and that she does have the time and money to read now anyways. She then slightly flexes to herself and says that she'll just buy it then since she's now rich and all. Eve then wonders why the shelves are so empty before noting how she does not see any human world books. She then clears her throat and asks the bookstore guy if the human world books are sold out as she can't find them on any shelves. He turns to her and asks if she does not know yet. He tells her they have been banned for quite some time now, which stuns her. He places her purchase into a bag as he tells her the ban is due to many hybrids illegally moving to the human world. He mentions how he heard the king of the human world is furious and wants to tighten restrictions before the situation gets worse. The man then wonders if a human has ever come to this side, as Eve then notes how she was just happy a moment ago after buying this book. Now she has to wonder if she'll end up living in the North forever. Side note, but being stuck in the North forever sounds quite familiar if you know what I mean. Rachel seems to be looking on before we see her speechless face. Later at the house, we see both Zion and Rachel laying down in bed as the door creaks, and Rachel notes how Eve was definitely talking about the human world in the store earlier. Her fire crackles as she wonders if this is what Eve meant when she was talking about moving out. Rachel notes that if Eve leaves, she may never see her again. This causes her to decide she must stop Eve at all costs. She then summons a freaking phoenix as she tells it she has a request. She tells it to bring the book Eve bought earlier to her. Rachel notes that Eve bought it secretly, so it must definitely be about the move, so Rachel wants to see what Eve has in mind. As Rachel flips through the pages, she notes how this is just an adult book. She then jolts and yells that she cannot believe this. She turns through the book as she wonders if Eve is really into this kind of stuff. She then tells the bird to take this part of the book and bring it to her brother Noel. She tells the bird that Noel must know this right away. The bird flies off in a blaze as Noel later grabs the paper while saying what? He shakes as he notes this is what Eve likes. Rachel really be out here exposing all of Eve's types and fetishes. We see a fancy castle as Noel notes to himself that he just decided to become the man Eve wanted. He then slams the table as he says damn it. He notes that he has been bending over backwards to become a man who looks beautiful while crying. He holds a book that contains 10 tear-jerking stories as Noel wonders what he can do to make himself cry. He notes that he has read dozens of sad stories that his men have brought him but none of them have helped. A tap can then be heard at the window as he spots Rachel's phoenix. The bird bursts in through the window with a flare as Noel stands wondering if something has happened to Rachel. The bird carries a mirror-like thing that transmits a signal from Rachel. Rachel alerts him that Noel needs to know what Eve likes right now. Noel then flinches as he says what? He looks into a book as he notes this is what Eve's ideal man is. He notes that Eve likes beastly men, which happens to be the complete opposite of him. Noel then opens the door as he notes it appears that he should not have been practicing to cry all this time. He decides to verify this person as one of his men asks where he is going so late, to which Noel says the north. The aide asks if he is really going again as he has just returned. The aide says Noel can't as he has an important meeting tomorrow, to which Noel says he will be back soon and tells the guy to stop following him. A dragon can then be seen flying off from the estate as the aide wonders what in the world could be making the chief head for the north so often. Back at the snow-covered forest, Rachel and Zion are playing with a sled as Rachel tells Zion to go faster. Zion tells Eve to join them as Rachel agrees, saying they should all play together. Eve says no thanks and tells the pair to have fun as Eve notes she should have let him play outside sooner considering how happy they look now. Eve says as she notes she is actually a bit envious. She notes that she was looking to have some fun last night herself as she previously flipped through the book, noting how long it has been since she got to do this. She then yells what as she reads about a male hyena hybrid who talks about how his body was hot so he came all the way here to see the female lead. She trembles as she notes the hyena guy had bronze skin and thick facial features. She wonders what this is as this is completely the opposite of what she likes. She sits in disbelief as she notes it had been so long since she'd got to read an adult novel that she forgot to skim through it before buying it. She leans her head on the side as she notes a guy with a healthy body is fine, but she just prefers someone who is moodier. And if he's pretty, then that's an extra 100 points. He likes his hands to be big but his fingers can't be thick. He has to have dark hair in contrast with his pale skin and a kind smile. In other words, Eve wants a guy to be like Noel, which causes her to jolt in shock at where her mind is wandering. She waves her hand as she blushes, wondering what she is thinking right now, and tells the evil spirits to get out of her head. A boom can then be heard suddenly behind her. She yells what as the wind whooshes right by her. She then sees and calls for Noel as he now notices her as well. She asks if they had an appointment today as Noel tells her not exactly. Noel stares at her as he notes how Zion definitely mentioned how Eve likes men that look beautiful when crying. He then notes to himself that the man in the illustration Rachel showed him was completely different from himself. He then unzips a button on his shirt as he decides he must test her. He then tells her that his body was so hot he could not sleep last night so he came all the way here. Eve blushes and gleams as she says excuse me and asks what he said happened to his body. She turns her head as she wonders why he is suddenly like this. She then also mentions that this is the same line that was used in the book she read yesterday. She notes that this must be a coincidence and wonders if he is actually feeling hot. Noel then leans over as he tells Eve to please cool him down, which causes her to gasp. Eve then notes to herself that she cannot help the fact that she's a wolf. We see Zion yell at Rachel saying it is his turn so she has to pull him. He asks if she is listening, to which Rachel wonders what her brother is doing. She wonders why he is like that after she gave him all that information. She notes that he could have made his skin bronze or something and wonders why he is acting so shy. She also notes how he still can't get the job done after all the help she has given and calls him a stupid lizard. Rachel is enraged and notes that if her brother is gonna be like this then she'll have to marry Eve herself. Zion in the back mentions how Rachel is not even listening to him anymore. He then turns saying he's not going to play with her anymore and starts to walk away. He notes how she sometimes says things he does not understand and how Noel always wants to play with Eve. He halts as he notes how Eve used to always play with him but now. He shakes his head to stop the tears as he says he knows how to play by himself. He continues to walk saying they all better not beg to play with him later. He then stumbles upon something shiny, wondering what it is. He notes that it is pretty as a suspicious individual hides behind a tree. The creep stares at the kid and then lets out a giggle like he's EDP 445. Noel tells her to please cool him down as Eve then grabs his clothes and internally says no. She says she knows he is hot but tells him that he should not unbutton in front of children. Noel sweats as he wonders if she does not like him because he is not a beastly man. He says he is sorry before she touches his face. She mentions how last time he told her that touching his head was more effective, right? He then recalls he did say that, but mentions it was due to him getting jealous from all the kids who were getting pats on the head. He notes how she still remembers that as Eve asks how this is and if he is cooling off. This causes Noel to be in disbelief at himself for even testing such a kind woman, all just to find what her ideal type is. He now closes his eyes as he says this is nice. As this scene continues, he stands and feels very ashamed of himself. Eve then mentions that she hopes he feels better now as Noel tells her thank you. Eve then notices that she buttoned his shirt up in such a hurry, so she wants to fix it properly now. As she does so, she asks why he unbuttoned his shirt anyways and that he was blushing while doing so. Noel is at a loss for words as then blushes, says he was in a rush as it was so hot, and that this was very rude. He then says he apologizes as something has caught Eve's eye. He tells her he will be careful from now on and that if she doesn't like his blushing he will work on that as well. Eve's heart beats more loudly as she internally asks her mom and dad what she should do as she has found her ideal guy for the first time in her life. The only issue is that he turns out to be a dragon. Zion reaches for the ground as he wonders what this is. He holds the thing that looks like a red blood cell as he notes how pretty it is, much like Ruby's eyes, and how warm it is. He decides to take it back home as someone then says hello to him. Zion asks who are you as he tells Zion he is not a bad person as Zion notes how strange his smile is. Zion recalls Eve telling him to be wary of people who smile for no reason as she called this a villain's smile. Zion tells the guy his sister told him not to talk to strangers as the man then says he knew it would not be this easy. He then sounds a lot like EDP as he notes how getting children to let their guard down around him happens to be his specialty. Zion stares as he says wow as we see the guy has some green hair like Zoro. Zion then mentions that the guy's hair color has changed as the man asks if Zion likes it. He tells Zion it is his special ability as he is a chameleon hybrid. Zion asks what a chameleon is as the man questions if Zion really does not know what that is. He tells Zion they can freely change the color of their bodies as Zion notes how amazing that is. The weirdo notes that he knew Zion would fall for this as Zion stares in awe. He then notes that it is time to carry out his mission. He asks Zion what he has in his hand as Zion says he found it here in the woods and that it is warm. The man mentions that Zion is right as it is warm before telling Zion that he is sure his sister would like it. Zion holds it thinking about Eve as the man notes how just a little bit more and Zion will be his. Yo, someone needs to call Chris Hansen right now. The man mentions how he knows a place where there are lots of things like that as Zion now hiccups. Tears drip down Zion's face as the man wonders why Zion is crying. The man notes he did not intend to make Zion cry as Zion talks about how his sister likes Ruby. The man asks who Ruby is as Zion mentions how his sister said she wants to hug Ruby every day because Ruby is warm. Zion would stand and stare from across the room as he whispers to himself that he is not cold. He would stare at his hand in sadness, before he now wonders if Eve would like him too if he had something like this. Zion cries saying Eve does not like him anymore and that likely giving her this won't make a difference. The man gets nervous as he notes how sad this story sounds and notes this is breaking his heart as he cries easily. The man then yells telling the little boy to not say that since his sister does not hate him, to which Zion says Eve likes Ruby more than him. The man replies by saying she loves Zion a lot and that he'll realize this once he grows up, to which Zion asks why he has to grow up to realize that. The man then mentions that is true and how someone should show they love somebody if they really do, as they will regret not doing so later on, to which Zion says that is right. Zion then blows his nose as the man then tells Zion to not hate his sister and that she may not express her love to him, but he is sure she loves Zion a lot. Zion says he understands as he mentions how he is feeling better thanks to the man, to which the man says that is good. The man then says he is sure his sister would like that warm gem if he gave it to her and that it would be good if Zion tells her how he feels after giving it to her. He mentions how it may hurt a bit though as he now internally notes he may have made the kid cry, but it is not time to finish the job. His mission was to use the kid as bait to get closer to the woman. A group of people referred to him as Camille and told him to go handle this. Someone then asks if somebody is hurt, to which we now see Rachel and Camille yells miss. Rachel asks what he is doing here. She wonders why he is with Zion as well before asking Zion why he left without saying a word. She blames it on him that she is unable to see what is going on between Eve and Noel right now. Previously she was watching and noting how the atmosphere between the pair seemed to be getting better. It looks as though she might be falling for his timidness. Rachel then turns to tell Zion that his sister's type must not be hyena men, then before finally realizing that he is gone. This caused her to become furious as she notes how he might have not been able to help, but in addition to that he also left without saying a word as well. She then calls out how he is having fun with someone he just met while she was looking for him, to which Zion nervously says no. Rachel says he better have a good excuse, to which Zion nervously clasps his hand together as even Camille seems stunned. Rachel then calls Camille a traitor as Zion scurries over to her side. She asks who sent him here and then says to tell her everything he knows, which causes Camille to get nervous. Before he had arrived here, everyone was on pins and needles about how not only the young lady but even the captain was not returning from the north. Someone angrily mentions that the captain seems to be raising a pet in the north, as another question if he means a wolf, and if they can trust this. The guy mentions that he is sure of it, since the captain not only keeps going back to the north but now buys a lot of romance novels as well. The other men question if the captain really did that before someone yells at Camille, telling him he must go to the north immediately. Camille wonders if someone is knocking at the door before someone chucks a book at him, telling him that he should not sleep at the meeting. He is then told to secretly follow the captain on his next visit to the north, to which Camille asks, "What for?" The man then tells Camille to use this to approach the person that is close with their captain. It is a pearl that got purified by the captain's inner strength that is fatal to normal people. They mention that it has more power added to it to increase its detrimental effect, and warn him not to let Rachel touch it as it shares the same attribute as her fire. The guy mentions that if the person their captain has met is qualified to be the chief's lifelong companion, then once she touches the gem she will absorb all of its powers into her body. Camille asks what if an unqualified person touches it, to which the guy mentions that of course the girl would then be unable to withstand the power that emulates from the gem and would be reduced to ashes. Camille notes to himself Rachel would be infuriated if he ever told her the full truth. He then tells Rachel that he apologizes, but he had no choice since the young lady and chief have not returned for so long. Rachel wonders to himself if they are going to use her brother's power to test Eve. This causes her to make an annoyed expression as she recalls how nice Eve has been to her, and does not want to risk anything. She calls for Zion and tells him to give it to her. Zion asks if she means this thing, as Rachel says yes, that thing, since it is very dangerous, so he'd better give it to her. Zion says yes as he then starts to hand it to her while Camille grabs his hair, saying he can't do that. He notes about how the pearl's fire will collide with Rachel's flames before plucking it away from them, since he does not want the young lady to be in jeopardy. Rachel asks what he is doing and demands it as he tries to keep it from her. She yells, telling him she told him to give it to her, as he notes if things go on like this she'll get it. He then decides the only option left is to swallow, as he does so with no hesitation. Rachel calls him an idiot as she yells for him to spit it out and to give it to her. As she chases him, she asks why he keeps running away. She mentions his life is at risk, as the man notes it will be more dangerous if Rachel got her hands on it. Rachel then says she will have to resort to force if he won't listen, to which Camille says she can't. Just then it appears as though he has swallowed it, as three of them stand awkwardly. She asks if he is crazy as she starts to note what would happen if he swallowed it. Camille shouts in agony as darkness seems to flow out of his mouth. He calls for Rachel and pleads with her to help him, as Rachel notes to herself how scary this is. Camille mentions that since he swallowed her brother's power he will die soon. Rachel then starts to feel immense fear that has just started flaring up inside her again. She starts to recall the nightmares she had of the old days in the north as voices ring in her head. She talks about how scared she is as she does not want to end up like that before her hand gets grabbed. She says Zion's name as she turns to him. He tells her to not be scared as he will protect her. Rachel notes he is trembling as well, yet he's still trying to help and protect her. This causes her to try and get calm, as if she becomes fully scared this will only put Zion in jeopardy. She tells Zion to get behind her as she then tells Camille that this may hurt a little. Suddenly something flies by the two kids and hits Camille's head as someone calls him a non-monetizable word. Camille falls back as Rachel wonders what was that just now. She stares at what looks like a frozen stone as someone mentions that somebody seems to be trying to destroy their peaceful life. Eve mentions how this jerk went this deep into the forest just to try and do that before telling Camille to not touch the kids.